Welcome to the Gill Athletics Connections podcast, man. We're here to talk about track and field and track and field coaches from around the world. I am so humbled to be your host, Mike Cunningham, as we are getting along here in season 4, kind of seeing the finish line, if you will, of season 4 and getting ready for season 5. We're just super excited. We've got some amazing, fun things coming out. We've got some little bonus content coming for you every day leading up to the USTFCA CCCA convention in December. And then we're doing the live version of the Gill Connections podcast at the USTF CCCA convention again on Monday, December 11th. I think it's 5:30 December time, Denver time. I get all my travel all mixed up. It's wonder how I'm anywhere on time. So let's get into it today. Help me welcome the interim head coach. We're going to talk about that a little bit. The wise, the wonderful from the University of New Orleans. Help me welcome Ben Hibbert. Ben, how are you, sir?
I'm good, Mike. Thanks for having me, man. I'm excited to be on.
Yeah, thanks for being here, man. I'm always kind of blown away. We have not missed a week in, getting on 4 years here. I'm always talking to some of the busiest people around, track coaches, right? I mean, there is no off season, if you will. There's always, for college, there's always recruiting. There's the fall.
Right.
For my high school coaches, they're teaching usually. I mean, I'm always blown away when, you guys come on here and give me an hour, 2 hours of your time. So I'm really, really grateful for you.
Oh no, yeah, definitely. I think what you do is great. I've caught a few episodes, and obviously you've had some great people over the years, and I think anytime you can spread that kind of knowledge and kind of like we've talked about, just have those conversations that are chill and just talking the sport. I think it's great. So thanks for having me.
Awesome. Well, you might need to put your foot in your mouth. I like to always put people on the spot when they say they've listened to a few episodes. Which one's been your favorite so far?
My favorite was my mentor, actually, one of my mentors, Ed Bethea.
Oh, yes.
Ed's a great storyteller, and he's had a journey, and he's very I think there's some great parts of his journey to learn from and to know about. So, I enjoyed Ed's podcast a lot.
That was a lot of fun. A guy that I've known for years, throughout my coaching career, was very influential early in my coaching career back in the day. So to have him on was really, it was pretty cool, actually. It's always neat to see guys like that, and super exciting for him taking over a Big Ten program after having done that at Ohio State and kind of putting his fingerprints on it. So it'll be one that a lot of people will be watching how Indiana Hoosiers are doing. So well, right now everybody's watching you, my friend. So let's hop into it. Somewhere along the way, coaching, assuming that you were an athlete, had to change for you. It's usually not a light switch. It's usually one of those fader bars, right? It had to go from something that was done to you. So Ben, go run this, throw that, etc. To it had to switch in your mind of like, oh, wait a minute, maybe I could be a coach. Where does coaching track and field begin for you?
Yeah, so obviously I know, I was an athlete growing up, kind of like, most people that find their way into this profession. I got into undergrad, ran at Cal State Northridge. And I was always one of those people who, for my first 2 years, I didn't have a clue what I wanted to do. I was like, I'm someone who sometimes will struggle with those long-term like views like that. But I was starting my sophomore year, junior, something like that. And I was coming up on the major deadline where I had to declare my major. And I was like, man, I got to get this figured out. And at some point I sat down and I was like, well, what do I really love? What I enjoy doing. And it's like, I love track. I enjoy doing track. Like I don't get tired of being at the track, whether I'm running or not. So I like watching it. I like learning about it. I was like, well, maybe I should take a little bit of a deeper look into this, and think about it a little bit. So I ended up declaring kinesiology, and kind of started to dive into that world a little bit, and then it was just once the ball was rolling, it never stopped.
That's awesome, man. It does amaze me. We've talked about this a few times on the podcast that we force 18-year-olds to choose a major, therefore choose a career path at such a young, I mean, you think about yourself at 18. I don't want to think about myself at 18. And it's like, wow, that seems like a lot of pressure for someone who doesn't even know the world at all as an 18-year-old. Take a step back. You went to Northridge, which is amazing. Northridge and Cal Poly SLO always amaze me at how many track coaches come out of those two institution. So it's no surprise maybe that you went to Northridge. Go back to high school, assuming you went to high school in California because you went to Northridge. What was your high school experience like with coaches over you? Good coaches, bad coaches, involved coaches? What were they like?
Yeah, so I had one coach all through high school. I went to high school in Bakersfield, California.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Frontier High School over there. My coach was a man by the name of David Gata. And he was like a hurdles guy primarily. I believe he ran at Fresno State collegiately. So, I started to really learn the hurdles from him. And man, he was like when I look back at, we look back and think about, who shaped our life, who shaped our journey. Gata is what I call him. Gata started it off, man. He was something special. He still to this day is someone where, I go home for a break or something like that, and I'll go sit in the kitchen with him and his family, and we'll just
Oh,
chat around the table and play card games or whatever. And very much through high school, he was like a father figure to me, and just super influential, super kind. Just took me right in. He had a son on the team who still to this day is one of my best friends, and it was just like we just clicked. I have an identical twin, and Gata called us like his third sons, like his set of twins. So Coach Gata was really influential, and still to this day I owe so much to that guy, just for the experience he gave me. Like the X's and O's of track are one thing and teaching are one thing, but just the person he was, and the love he gave me for the sport and all that is something entirely different and something that I'll carry with me forever.
That's amazing. I love that. One of the goals for the podcast here, for uplifting and honoring coaches is exactly that. The influence, the positive influence coaches have over young people. It's really
Yeah,
immeasurable, what
yeah.
coaches on the high school, middle school, college level do. It's like no other actually. What with Gata there? Can you think of an example you can share with us of that belief, that love, that inspiration that he gave you that, I mean, carries on today? It's quite amazing. I saw your face kind of change when you thought about I see you put that mental picture of going back to his house and sitting in the kitchen
Yeah.
talking stories. It was like, that was such a great face. Can you give us an example of kind of his style?
Ooh, you mean like his coaching style or just his personal style?
Yes.
I think, ooh, that's a tough one just because I think there's a lot, and so many different things we did. Um, I'd say probably the biggest ones was our Sunday practice, and I call it a practice, but it wasn't really a practice. It was more like let's go hang out at the track, and if we get over hurdles, cool. But it was just something we really enjoyed doing, and like as high schoolers, we talk about how like it's like a 2 hour job a day, maybe, just while you're at practice and you're out there hanging out and messing around. But like he really instilled that love in it, and we loved it. And it's like it wasn't him reaching out to us like, "Hey, you want to go practice on Sunday?" It was like, "Hey, coach, can we go out on Sunday and just like hurdle, mess around, hang out?" And it's just something like I don't think that happens a lot. I think there's like those private coaches and stuff that they get into the weekends and whatnot when you're not in the school week, but just getting to hang out with coach and his family and stuff on Sundays and just be out at the track and have that experience where it's like I don't even know if I'd call it like full workouts. We're just out there like tweaking stuff, messing around with stuff, trying stuff out, just for the love of the sport. I think was one of the big ones, that probably set into me.
Now, my face perks up when you said you were a hurdler. Hurdles are my absolute favorite. My very first ever email address way back in the day was Hurdle Love. I mean, I'm a yeah, I'm a hurdles geek here. Okay.
Yeah,
So I want to know, it's one thing to be a hurdler versus a sprinter or even a jumper, right? We grow up kind of naturally, not kind of, we grow up naturally running. Like, that's what God put us on earth for. We sprint. We know how to do that.
right.
When we're kids, we know how to jump over creeks and river or whatever, we kind of do that. Hurdles are a little different. We don't typically put our bikes in a row and hurdle over we just typically don't do that. So I'm interested, what was your first hurdle experience like? Do you remember the first time coach said, "Hey, Ben, let's try this and put hurdles up"? Good, bad, hit the turf.
Actually, I'm gonna take you before my first true hurdle experience. So the first hurdle experience I watched, because it's kind of ironic. I was probably in like fourth or fifth grade, sitting at a track meet for my older brother, and I watched this kid go to hurdle, and he eats it as bad as you can possibly fall. And I'm like, I remember saying it out loud. I was like, yeah, I'm never doing hurdles.
Never.
Like I would never do that. And then and my first experience actually came in seventh grade. Um so I grew up in Illinois, and in 7th grade you can start hurdling. Second day of practice, coach does the classic. The entire team lines up. He puts one hurdle out there, and he's like, "Go over it." And he just kind of like plucked 4 or 5 of us that halfway looked decent. And man, after that, it just never turned back. Never turned
Really?
back. It was interesting. Yeah.
Now, you just said you grew up in Illinois, but we've been talking about California. Help me connect
Right.
those dots. That's a little far.
Yeah. I grew up in Illinois. I lived in Illinois until well, I finished 7th grade in Illinois. At the beginning of 8th grade, I moved to California
Huh.
with my mom and got planted out there. So
Yeah. Wow.
um, yeah,
Well,
I've lived a couple different places.
we're at here in Illinois.
So I grew up in Quincy,
Yeah.
West Central Illinois.
Hmm.
Yeah. Dad still lives out there, so I make a few trips back from time to time.
Yeah.
And then I lived in Jacksonville for a while.
Yeah. Okay.
And that's where I went to like grade school and 7th grade and stuff like that.
Very
So
cool. It's funny that you called it West Central Illinois because we call where we live here in Champaign East Central Illinois. So that's fun.
yeah,
Yeah, yeah. I
yeah,
love that. I love that picture putting all the hurdles up. That was kind of my experience. That's why I was asking because I'm like, oh, I want to compare this to my experience.
right,
We had and I love my high school track coaches, but they just didn't know training, and maybe through no fault of their own. It was a different time. It was '90s. It was super hard to find training, coaching,
right.
education, and things like that. So every day, no joke, until my senior year, every day practice was, we'd do our fairly stereotypical, right, 2 laps of jogging, do our static stretching and all that kind of stuff
Yeah,
that we would, not do maybe today. But
right.
then every day, I can't stress that enough. Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, unless we had a meet, we would do the meet. Meaning, if you were on the
Really
yeah. So I'm from Alabama. 4x8 is the very first event. So the 4 people who were on the 4x8 would go and everybody would just sit there and watch or screw around, maybe go set their blocks. The next race was the maybe the 100 or 110 hurdles. So the guys would go down there, us 4x8 guys would be breathing heavy, and the guys would do the 100, the 110, and then we have to do the mile or the quarter or whatever. We do the in order. Yeah.
interesting.
No, not interesting at all. No,
I mean,
terrible,
that,
right?
that's one way to set up a training plan.
And I'm not sure it's training plan, sir. No, you're giving a little bit too much credit there. And so I was an 800-meter kind of guy. So I did the 4x8, the 8, the mile, and the 4x4, and sometimes the 2 mile every single day.
Man,
And, pretty typical distance runners will look over at the sprinters and be like, man, they're not doing anything. Well,
right.
for training people, we know why. But our guys literally weren't doing anything. They were running the 100 and done. 4x1, done. We didn't have the 4x2. So then they go run the 200,
Classic.
done. They didn't even run the 4x4s, all those 800-meter guys, right? So I was like, man, I know I'm not fast. I can't do the 100.
Right.
But come on, man, I should be able to do some hurdles. So I asked Coach, I think it was going into my junior year. I was like, hey, I want to try out for the hurdles. And he's like, all right, go see Coach Paschal after practice. So after 8, 4x8, it's craziness, right? He sets up 4 or 5 hurdles at 39 at their marks, which again, for coaches, you're right. Yeah, you're shaking your head. Everybody's listening going, no. And he goes, all right, Cunningham, go. And so I just, I think I took 10 steps in between each hurdle. But I get done, and my experience is that kids want to please coaches. Like they want,
right.
Like, hey, did I do good? Did I do good for you? Right. So I get done with those 5, and I look at them like, like, how was that? I didn't fall. Like, oh, pretty good. And coach is like, that's pretty good. It's pretty good. Let's try it again. I'm like, all right, no problem, man. I must have done pretty good. So I go back, run, get done, look up. I'm like, how was that, coach? He's like, man, that's pretty good. One more time. Now everybody knows what happens with the one more time, right? So I go, well, I didn't quite jump. I was literally jumping. This ain't a further who's saying jump. I know the difference. I was jumping. I just didn't jump high enough, and I bit it. And we had one of those old recycled tire tracks. So so my hands, knees, but I pop up and I'm looking at him like, I'm just like a little puppy, like how, feedback.
Right.
And he goes, man, Cunningham, you keep working, and one day you're gonna be shoo, shoo. And I was like, holy crap, that's amazing. I was so excited. I ran all the way home. That's how excited I was. Now, I lived right across the street from the track, so it's not that far, but still, I ran all the way home to my brother. And I was like, Brian, like, coach thinks if I keep working, I can be shoo, shoo. And my brother, who I love him to death, one of the most real down-to-earth guys in the world, he just looks at me. He's like, what the hell does that mean? And I was like, yeah, I don't really know.
class.
Like, I think I kind of know, but I don't know it all. Never to this day. And I've coached some fairly good hurdlers in my lifetime now at this point. I still don't know what really was supposed to mean. Yeah. I was
Right.
absolutely terrible. I was so bad as we went into our area meet, which was kind of the precursor to go into state. Our 4x8 team had a chance to make it to state, and 4x8 was the very first event. But I still was like, I think I'm gonna tell coach, maybe I should just skip the hurdles and focus on the 4x8, which is ridiculous because the hurdles are after the 4x8, right? So I go up to coach and I was like, hey, coach, I think I should, skip the hurdles and focus on, and that's all I got. And coach was like, yeah, okay, that's good. I was like, oh, man.
You never believed after all.
Yeah, like you should like at least spot me a little bit. Like, are you sure? Okay.
Right.
Yeah. No, he was like, oh, good. Okay. Like it was paining him that I was doing this. So I'm glad your experience maybe was a little better than mine out there. So you grew up in Illinois. You start. I love the third, fourth grade of like, I will never do that event. That
Never.
seems terrible. And then you get
into my mind forever.
So what was it, when and where was it in the hurdles during high school that it was like, oh yeah, gosh, I don't know that I could ever not do that. Like it's a good event, or did it ever become that for you?
I mean, yeah, it definitely did. I think seventh and eighth grade, I was always the kid that like won the race, but didn't really know what he was doing, and I think freshman year of high school was tough because I was probably good enough to run a few, or no, I guess freshman year I would have stayed on like the JV heights, but I really started to love it, and I started to like actually understand hurdling a little bit. And I think by the end of freshman year, I was probably at that point where I was like, yeah, like this is my thing, and I'm all in on this one. So I definitely had that point, and I think that's when the real love developed, and it really got fun for me was kind of when I turned that corner and I was like, I could be good at this. Because I was a soccer player at the time as well, which I think quite a few track athletes find themselves in early on. And I think by the end of freshman year, I was like, yeah, like track. I always thought soccer was my thing. I was like, track could be it. Like track could be what I do for a while. So I'd say that was probably the turning point.
In what years is this roughly?
Oh, great question. Well, I graduated high school in 16, so this probably would have been
perfect. Okay, that works.
like, yeah, 13,
It
something like that.
gives me a time frame. So
Yeah.
at this, in this, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 years, we certainly had YouTube and things like that. Were you the kind of kid that like, did you go watch YouTube videos of hurdling, or was it still just when I go to practice, I'm listening to what coach says?
I would say at that point, as a freshman, sophomore in high school, it was more of like, I'm gonna just go listen to what coach says. And like we'll film ourselves at practice and watch that back some. But for the most part, like I'm gonna just listen. I'm not gonna dive too deep into the rest of it.
Did you
at that
know
point
who like the top hurdlers in the country, and if you know in US, that means you know in the world. Did you know who they were though?
Yeah, I definitely did because I was very much a fan of track and field. So the hot person on the block at my time was Devin Allen. He was in high school during that time and just tearing up the world. So as I started to grab onto that a little bit and started to pay attention to that stuff.
Yeah, because I'm always curious. We hear every year, coaches who lament that, man, these kids don't know who the top people are. And guess what? When I was growing up in the 90s, we said the exact same thing. Meaning I didn't know who the top track people were. It's interesting.
Right.
You said, yeah, Devin Allen was tearing it up in high school. And I think that's a big difference between 2015-ish and 1995. I might have been able, because of track and field news and maybe, TV every once in a while, known who the top American hurdler or hurdlers was.
Yeah.
I certainly would not have known the high schooler. I would have known my local high school, like, oh yeah, Timmy over at, Smith Station is the stud. That's all I would have known. I wouldn't even maybe even known the state, like unless it was from my area, who the best person was. That's interesting. You knew Devin.
Yeah.
It was kind of on your radar. I was like, oh man, this kid down in Phoenix, man, he's killing it.
Right.
Why can't I run that fast? Right. Yeah.
Right. And I think as I look back on it, like I knew high school probably better than I knew like professional. Like if I sit here, I don't know if I could tell you who the top professional in the US was in like 13, 14.
Yeah.
In that time, I'm not sure who. I mean, I might know some of them retroactively now that I've learned the history. Right. But like during that time, I probably knew high school via Twitter or whatever, a little better during that time.
Yeah. I'm always wondering. I think, like, I don't think I care that a high schooler knows who the top people are. High school or college or professional. I really don't. I think coaches, I think we say it in good intention, like, oh man, I really wish my kids were so passionate about, they know Tom Brady, or they know,
Hmm.
whatever. I don't know. I don't follow baseball. I was going to try to name a baseball player and would have gotten laughed
Mike
at me.
Trout.
Yes, that's who I was going to say. Mike Trout, of course, right? But they don't know track. And I don't know that that's
Right.
a problem of our young people. I think that's maybe a problem of our sport, that we're not hyping and on TV enough and things like that
Right.
to be able to be there. But I don't think that a kid isn't going to reach their potential if they don't know who Trey and Holloway and
Right.
Daniel
Right.
Robert, there I just
Yeah.
stuttered through them. It's like, oh, that's a really good example. I stuttered through Trey's easy. That's my brother from another mother. So that's an easy
There
one
you
there.
go.
All right. So
Yeah.
you're falling in love with the hurdles. You're at least passionate enough that other top kids in the country, at least in the region
Hmm.
out on the West Coast. And that was a pretty good one to know, Devin Allen. So
Yeah.
you end up, how did you choose Northridge, and what did you think? I know you mentioned you didn't really know what you wanted to do or become those first couple of years. But typically an 18-year-old has kind of an idea of like, maybe I want to be a teacher or, a fireman or whatever. Why'd you pick Northridge, and what were you kind of thinking might be a career path for you?
Right. So I actually heard of Northridge. I was training at a gym there in Bakersfield, kind of like getting my lifts in and stuff, or I guess learning what the weight room was at that time. And the guy who owned the gym had run at Northridge, and he played football there actually. And then he went to, I think, Georgia and did like his master's or something like that. So he had mentioned Northridge, kind of put in a good word. Like at the time, Avery Anderson was the head coach there.
Yeah.
And this guy knew Avery. So he kind of put me onto him, and I checked it out a little bit. I was like, I'm not sure. I actually went to Simplot games up in Idaho to run my senior year, and I'm walking back towards the stand after my prelims race, and I look to my right, and I'm like, oh man, I think that's Avery Anderson. Like, I'm almost sure that's who that is. I go up to the stands, like Google it real quick to make sure I know the face, and I walked back down there, and I was like, why not just go introduce myself? Like, what am I going
Yeah.
to lose from it? So I just walked up to him. I was like, hey, my name's Ben. I run in high school here. Like, I've heard about Northridge, and I know this guy who knows you. And that's kind of how Avery and I got in contact.
Huh.
And then as I went through my recruiting process, like, I was not heavily recruited. There were places I wanted to go that were above my head, and but of course I was sitting there dreaming. So I was talking to a couple D2s and stuff like that, maybe walk-ons at a couple D1s, but Northridge was the only visit I took actually. Um, but what capped it was when I learned who the hurdle coach was at Northridge. It was Boogie Johnson, and I started doing, I did my Twitter research and whatnot, and I figured out who Boogie was, what he had done, who he was currently training. And, I loved the sport enough at that point where I was like, that made my decision. I was like, I'll find some academic program to get into. I'm not worried about that. Northridge is an hour and a half up the road from Bakersfield, decently close to home.
Okay.
But I was like, if I'm gonna love this sport and I'm gonna do it the next level, like, I'm gonna do it with the best. And
Yeah.
Boogie was that.
No joke.
Um, yeah, and then I liked Avery. I had a good relationship with Avery after going through the process and stuff. So that was kind of how I came to my decision, and how that process looked.
That's really cool. And again, we demonize technology sometimes, but man, I didn't have that in the mid 90s of like looking to see who the
Right.
track coach. I don't even know how I would have even known who a track coach was.
Hmm.
I remember writing a letter to Oglethorpe in Georgia. I don't even know how I knew of Oglethorpe. Maybe they sent me a letter. I'm not sure. But like I had to send a letter of like, hey, what are your half mile standards? And Troy University,
Right.
which I ended up going to eventually. I remember because they were local. It's funny how people pick and think about schools. Troy was just on the news at that time because they set the D2 basketball scoring record. They scored like something like
Oh,
200 points. It was crazy. There was no defense in that game,
right.
obviously. And so because they were on the local news, and it was like, Troy, an hour away from where I grew up. And I was like, oh, well, I wonder if they got track. And so I probably
Right.
wrote a letter like track coach, Troy Athletics. Like I probably didn't know the dude's name,
Right.
but you to be able to go like, all right, let me see who this guy. Oh, this is the hurdles coach. Wait, who they coach? Hold on now. Let me do a little Googling. That's what an amazing opportunity kids have today to be able to do
Yeah.
that kind of research on coaches in institutions around. That's really awesome. Love that you
Definitely.
went there, and I love that Avery was head coach. Great, I love Avery. What an awesome dude. Was a really good footballer himself. He played in the NFL on the Colts, if I remember correctly, while
Yeah,
being
I
while being
believe
a
so.
while being a decathlete.
Yeah.
That's crazy. Like that's a
Correct.
whole different
That
level,
is
man.
crazy.
Yeah, yeah.
Right.
And then of course Boogie, like, come on, man.
Man,
Tell,
doesn't
tell
get
me
better than him.
tell me what it's like. He's coached and coaches some of the greatest hurdlers in the world, and now is doing it at Arkansas, joining his brother Chris Johnson,
Right.
who's a Gill podcast alum as well,
Yep.
down there in Fayetteville. What's it like working as an athlete for him?
Right. Um, Man, Boogie, it's a lot. It's a lot, but I was, for me, it was in the best ways because I'm a person who, like, if you lean into me a little bit and you kind of tell me how it is, like, I'm going to respond to that. And obviously, like, that's how Boogie is. Like, Boogie's going to tell you how it is, and he's going to tell you he expects, and then he's not going to accept anything less. Um, I actually had a similar question. I was talking with Dylan Sorensen formerly from UNC a couple years ago, and he was like, "Man, like, what was it like being coached by him?" And I was like, "The easiest way to put it is like when I would walk into a meet, like walk in the door of a meet behind Boogie, I was like, can't no one in here touch me? Like, I got this dude in my corner, I'm good.
It's like
We're
Suge Knight
solid."
leading you in.
Yeah, yeah. I'm like it's kind of weird to say, but it's just like he gave me confidence in who I was and like the athlete, and I was like, if he trusts me to do this work every day, and he trusts me to show up to this meet and perform, like, why wouldn't I trust myself?
Oh, wow.
So like Boogie, obviously he writes a great program. He's a genius in that regard, but really just like the confidence he has as a person is a lot of what I took. Um, and a lot of what was like fun for me. And even like yes, he's an intense person, but it was fun to train for him. Like it was fun to be with him each day and learn from him and stuff like that. So man, crazy experience and something that has literally shaped my career. Um, like obviously as we start to talk about my coaching path and stuff like that, we'll get more into it. But he he's probably the reason I'm in this position today.
Was there, coming from a self-admitted, wasn't recruited very highly, out of high school, and he also, he's coaching probably pretty good hurdlers there at Northridge, but also has this post-collegiate group. Was there any intimidation factor for you?
Um, Probably to some extent, yes. I still probably remember the first day speech where he sat us down and he was like, "Look, we're not messing around. I'm not messing around. I'm serious about this." Um, and just gave me that whole spiel, and I was probably like, "What have I gotten myself into?" Like, am I good here? um, so maybe a bit of that, and like the first time we were probably around the pro group, I was probably like, "Whoa, like that's Brian Rollins, like that's the little Muhammad, like what are we doing here? Like why am I running the same session they're running and stuff like that?" So maybe a little bit at the beginning, but I think as I grew and matured, and the more time I spent around him and the group, it became more kind of like I said, like a confidence thing, and a comfortability thing than it was like a scary thing.
Yeah, and that's okay. Like, I appreciate you admitting that, because so what you're describing there is stress, right? Like, oh man, am I good
Right.
enough to be here? What am I doing here? Am I good here? Like, should I be here? Like,
Right.
that's stress. And sometimes people, and certainly stress has some health issue, as far as over stress and things like that. But stress and nervousness, maybe nervousness is the better adjective here on this describer, is your body telling you that it's important. If you
Yeah,
would have gone in there
exactly.
and been like, oh, who cares? Big deal that they run the Olympics, whatever. It'd be like, oh, I don't know that he's gonna be okay here. I don't know that he's gonna take this
Right.
serious and do the little things that I need him to do to become a good hurdler. But with nervousness of like, oh, I better be paying attention. Oh, I better be, he wants my foot right here. I better be doing everything I can to put my foot right here, things like that. So
Right.
that's why I like that question of like, and that description of watching these really good people and the seriousness of Boogie. And it's like, all right, well, I can either shirk away from it. Some people
Yep.
run from nervousness and stress, and others. I liked your visual, and if you're watching on YouTube, you actually saw him do it when you started answering that question. You said, when someone leans into me, and you leaned in. It was
Yeah.
interesting. So when some people
Yeah.
do that, some people shirk away, and other people say, okay, well, I'm gonna lean right back into you and get everything
Right.
that I can. When you going into around junior year, you had to pick a major, and you decided like, oh, okay,
Hmm.
maybe this coaching thing could be it, and you go into kinesiology. Did you notice yourself paying attention to what and how Boogie was doing things with the group. It's one thing to be an inactive participant of like, okay, yes, sir. Yep. Go run this. All right, go do this. And then, starting to be curious of like, I wonder why we're doing this today after we did that yesterday. Was it an immediate switch for you, or how did you interact with that portion of kind of pre-coaching, if you will, learning how to coach as an athlete still?
Right. I think it was more when at that time, junior year, is more of a realization moment because I kind of looked back and I was like, well, I've kind of been like learning this the whole time. Like I went through my freshman year, I had like a freak knee injury where I like popped my PCL hurdling, and so I was out for a couple months. But I never skipped a practice still, and I would find myself literally just standing behind Boogie and listening to his cues, seeing what he was teaching and stuff like that. And honestly, I might argue I learned more in those couple months than I did in the few months after it that I had on the track. Um, and then sophomore year again, I just found myself paying attention to what he was doing and how he was coaching and the cues he was giving, and what worked for me versus what worked for someone else and stuff like that. And I think when I went to pick my major junior year, I was like, what am I most interested in? Well, I know what sport I do. I know what I spend all my time on. But then I started to realize like I really enjoy the technical side of it. Like I enjoy asking those questions and understanding the way he teaches me versus the way he teaches someone else. So I kind of think it was a bit of a realization moment where I was like, well, I kind of already know what I'm interested in. I just kind of have to put my head down and decide, you know? And I think thinking back through all that and noticing what I had been doing kind of pushed it. And then when I started to think like, okay, maybe this is the route I want to go, I went to Boogie's office and I was like, hey man, like I'm trying to make this decision. Like I really enjoy what we do and I enjoy what I learned from you. Like, can you give me any advice? And I don't remember exactly what he told me that day in the office, but obviously it convinced me that it was worth going for. Um, and then it kind of developed from there. And I kind of, while still being his athlete, I fell under his wing a little bit, and then I really did like I actively started thinking about it differently, or I actively started asking him different questions and stuff like that. So that was kind of where it started at.
How did you take advantage of that? You mentioned asking him some questions and kind of taking underneath the wing. Did you start writing down workouts more? Did you start suggesting workout? That might be dangerous with a boogie.
Very dangerous.
How might you have taken advantage of that? Because this is really, I mean, what you're really describing is, I'm going to call it an accidental internship. Meaning you didn't
Hmm.
go there like, oh, I'm going to learn how to coach from Boogie. You went there like, oh, I'm going to be coached by him. I still may end
Right.
up becoming an accountant for all I know. But now
Right.
once you've settled your mind and like, okay, I'm gonna like I'm studying kinesis. I'm gonna try this, coach. This might be the actual career path. And I've got
Hmm.
this really experienced hurdles coach. So I'm gonna learn everything. You're in an internship program, which oh my gosh, I wish more people could have something like that. That's quite
Right.
amazing. How might have you have
Right.
taken more advantage of that? Some examples.
I think the biggest one was junior year was the year I started a training like journal. I wrote down my workouts and stuff because I am a very, very technically minded, process oriented, like let's have a plan person. And I knew like that was an important part of coaching was having a plan and like I was observant enough to know like volumes were fluctuating and things were changing at certain times of the year and stuff like that. So junior year I started writing stuff down, um, and basically started trying to pick the patterns out of it. Like what's he changing where? Why is he doing this here? And then when I found something I couldn't figure the pattern out on, I'd go ask him. And sometimes he was straightforward with the answer, sometimes he wasn't. Um, but that's kind of I would say that's kind of what changed. Still being an athlete, like my questions about training in training didn't change much.
Hmm.
Never ever did I suggest we change anything. Like you said, that might be dangerous. It was dangerous. Boogie had a plan and we were sticking to that plan. So I don't think like in practice my change or my questions changed necessarily, but I think like when I was able to step back at home and write in my like training log and stuff, that's when I started to look at it a little differently.
Did you notice any change in his interactions with you as you got more and more serious into I'm going to become a track coach?
Yes, as it developed, very much so. Initially, I think he had probably had that conversation a couple, as in several times with people who had come to his office and stuff, and it was just kind of like a yeah, yeah, this that. But then So I think the summer going into senior year, which was actually the year he left Northridge, I asked him one day towards the end of spring, like, "Hey, can I intern for you like this summer? Like, I know you're running the pro group all summer. Like, you guys are on the world circuit, all that stuff. Like, can I help you for the summer? I'm not doing anything." And I think that's when he started
Mhm.
to take me seriously. And Boogie's a very like close to the vest person, so why he let me into that side of his world, I have no clue. But I was his intern that summer, and then from there it was like, okay, like Boogie saying like, okay, I'm in your corner. Like if I can help you, let me know.
Yeah.
And then I really started to learn from him and stuff like that. That summer was I asked my fair share of questions that summer and learned my fair share of stuff. So that was kind of when the switch happened, and I think he realized I was serious about it, and I truly wanted to like put my mind to this and do something about it.
We had, speaking of decathletes like Avery, we had Cameron Babb on the podcast a long time ago now. She probably was in the hundreds. He's the head coach at Washburn University in Kansas, does an amazing job there. And we kind of had an aha moment, if you will, in regards to athlete to coaching, right? So he was an athlete in Emporia State, decathlete, right? And he was
Hmm.
describing how the throws coach at Emporia, he and her just, he's like, I just wasn't catching it. I just, she wasn't coaching me right or something. I don't know. I'm paraphrasing here. So if you go back and listen to it
Yeah.
and I've got it wrong, don't get me wrong. But it wasn't jiving, right? And then he fast forward, he talks about he's in the coaching world now, and he's at the USTF CCCA convention, which hallway talks are some of the most valuable things we get there. And he starts giving an example, sharing a story that he's sitting down with a throws coach, and she's telling him how she coaches, and he's like, he's absorbed, and he's like, oh, okay, this makes sense. He goes, and I came back and changed some things of how I coach my decathletes, and it worked. Well, he kind of let slip real quick. He kind of just flew right over. That person he spoke to was his throws coach at Emporia. And I was
Oh,
like, well, hold on a minute now. I was like, so when
wait.
when you're an athlete, the same person, and we're not talking about decade in between, we're talking about probably maybe 4 or 5 years. So she probably
Right.
coaches the same way or very much similar. Probably has developed a little bit after 4 years, but still the core. And what we kind of came up with is, as an athlete, the pursuit of track and field is very selfish, meaning you're taking everything coach says into you, so how you can become a better hurdler or decathlete or whatnot, right? As a
Right.
coach, your education is very selfless, meaning every time you're trying to learn something from other people, it's, well, how do I now push that out to my athletes? You're at this time frame of your life, you're in a very halvesy, not halvesy, you're still majority athlete. You're, let's call it 75 to 80% athlete, but you definitely
Yeah.
have your mind on coaching, but you are learning from a guy like Boogie of the selfless of like, okay, I need to take in what he's taken. How, I'm curious now looking back, because now you have perspective, right? In the moment, it's very hard to know what's going on, but now you're a few years past this. Were you able to think about it, process it, that what he's telling me, I've got to now figure out how to, because you're not coaching anybody at this point, right?
Right. Right.
Or were you still more on the, I'm gonna call it the selfish, the athlete side of like, okay, I'm taking all this in. Okay, these are the things I'm going to be doing so I can become a better hurdler. How are you processing them? It's not a very elegant question here, a little dirty question.
Right, but I think I get what you're going at. I think for that summer, I was very much in like a coach mode, if you want to call it that. If
Okay.
if I knew what that was, I'm not sure
Mhm.
because I wasn't, like you said, I wasn't coaching athletes myself. But I was very much starting to look at it from a coach perspective. Um, actually that change was happening at Northridge. Boogie was on his way out. Justin Johnson from
Hmm.
Louisville was on his way in.
Another great
And I
decathlete.
Yeah, talk about it, and Northridge alum.
Right.
So so I was actually kind of teetering on the fence, like, do I just want to like finish my degree this fall semester, and be done and go into coaching?
Even though you had
And
another
I,
year of
I
eligibility.
correct, yes. And that was actually a question I ended up posing to Boogie, like, do you think this is a good idea? And I'll never forget it because I still like I'll tell people the same thing today. He looked at me and he went, "Man, you got the rest of your life to coach. You only got one, maybe two more years to run. Like, I think if you cut out of it now, you will regret it. Like, you should
Yeah.
stay in. no matter who your coach is, you should finish your eligibility. And I did, and it even ended up going past Northridge. But I think for that summer, to come back to your question, I think for that summer, I was very much in a coaching mode. Like, how can I take this in, and how am I going to teach it in my style? How am I going to apply this in my own way? Because God knows I'm not Boogie, because nobody is. But I was starting to figure out how I was gonna turn it in my own style, and how I wanted to make it my own.
If we would have been sitting somewhere and you'd have told me that story of like, yeah, going into my senior year, I actually thought about not running my senior year to coach, I would have been like, oh yeah, this guy definitely becomes a coach. Like that's very selfless of like, hey, I'm going to give up.
Yeah.
I mean, come on, running track. I know it's very hard. Practices are hard. It's hot in Northridge. I get it. But being a college athlete is one of the funnest things in the entire stinking world, man.
Yep.
Memories are made,
Yep.
friendships are made, experiences in different parts of the country. Come on, man. I think
Right.
a lot of us would trade places back with a college athlete any day, any moment, right? So for you to say like, I'm having a good time and I'm getting better, but you know what? Maybe I should just go ahead and go into coaching now. That's selfless right there. That is like, maybe I should stop pursuing my own so that I can help others pursue, man. So I would have, if I'd have been sitting with you that summer at the bar and you'd be like, yeah, I'm thinking about not running. I'd be like, oh, wow, you're definitely going to be a coach, bro. I love Boogie's advice there, and would have given the same advice of like, hey, man, you ain't coming back to this. You can
Right.
always become a coach, but you ain't never coming back to be an athlete in college. Right. So that's cool. So as you get along into senior year and you got Justin John, another great man. Well, you've had some pretty
I know, man.
pretty
I know, I
good
got
undergrad
lucky.
coaches there. Absolutely. What was the plan? What was the next step to get into quote unquote actual coaching? Was it, did you GA? Did
Right.
you intern somewhere? Did you go get an assistant's job? Where'd you go?
Yeah, so this is actually where it got dicey. I ran indoor my senior year, because this was 2020. We all know what 2020 was, right?
Oh yeah. Okay.
Yeah,
You're
exactly.
so young. Oh, you're so young.
Yeah, I know. I get
Love
that.
it. Love it.
But so I ran indoor year, and like I think I had indoor like eligibility from my freshman year left over. So like if I had ran my whole senior year, I would have just had indoor, and I wasn't even worried about that. I was gonna be done. Ran indoor, and I started like looking at grad schools, started to figure out who I wanted to be a volunteer for. Like that was my plan: volunteer, grad assistant, whatever you want to call it. And that's where I went to Justin. And I was like, hey man, like I'm trying to figure out what I want to do. Like I think there's two pieces to this. There's the coach I'm going to work for, and there's the program I'm going to take academically. I'm going to start with the coach because personally, that's more important to me. Like, I want someone who's willing to work with me. Like, whose name can you lay down? Who would you recommend? Like, can you give me any ideas? And he gave me a pretty solid list of people. And I started sending out emails, like, can I be your volunteer next year? Can I be your grad assistant next year? Still thinking at that time that's what it was. And I got, I kind of narrowed it down. I had a pretty small list. It was probably 4 schools maybe. One of them was Indiana, and one of them was Ed Bethea.
Yeah.
Justin spoke very highly of Indiana. He was like, from the outside, it seems like their program is quite well put together. Like Ed runs a pretty good ship. He's a great dude. Like I think he's someone worth reaching out to. So I reached out to Ed via email. I bet I emailed the dude 3 times before he finally hit me back. Like, I don't remember what he said, but something to the effect of, hey, no one has reached out for this position yet. Let's schedule a call and talk. And then probably a week after he sent that email, COVID hit. I had run one outdoor meet my senior year, COVID hit, and obviously the world just shuts down. And then that kind of changed the perspective a little bit as to what those following years would look like. Like, because then all of a sudden I had an indoor left and an outdoor left, so I have a full season left. And I started to do the math, like, well, do I really want to be done? Like, especially if I can go to a big school and run like Power 5, do I want to try that out? So that's kind of how like those next years started to form. I loved my half year, I guess you could call it, with Justin. Like I wish I probably could have. Well, I do wish I could have finished that year out because I liked his style a lot, but I also wouldn't trade it because of the experience I got after. But he was really the one that kind of set me up for what comes after Northridge, and as I start to dive into my professional or my profession, if you want to call it that.
There was a lot of uncertainty during this time frame for sure, right?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you had one outdoor meet. I was at the indoor national meet, waiting minute by minute of like,
Yeah.
are we just packing everything back up? Are we just done?
Yeah.
And we all know how it all went down. So interesting. I love, following along journeys of like where we were. So we were probably on episode 6 of this podcast at that
Oh,
point.
wow.
Yeah, it's just so fun. We started in January, and so it's March. We hadn't had very many at that point. It's just so interesting.
Right.
To now, to if I'd have seen you in March of 2020 on our 6th podcast and be like, you see that kid over there? He's gonna be the podcast in like 3-4 years.
A little way down the road.
It's trippy to kind of think about, man. It's like, so
Right.
that means right now there's some athlete in high school or college that, in 5-10 years will be on this podcast. It's just kind of weird, I guess.
Yep.
I don't know. So there's a lot of uncertainty in athletics, a lot of uncertainty in the world. This kind of puts you in a little bit of uncertainty of, you had a plan, and what's the Mike Tyson quote? Everybody has a plan until they're punched in the face, right? We all got punched in the face here with COVID.
Yeah.
How did your plan evolve? What did you end up doing?
So I applied to, I think by that time I had it down to 2 schools. It was going to be Indiana or it was going to be Kentucky. Applied to both. Indiana hit me back first, accepted me. Great. I got into a sport and coaching science master's program, and like by reading like the curriculum and stuff, I was like, I like this program a lot. Like this makes sense to me. Got on the phone with coach, and we're talking about it. And at one point I was just like, well, coach, like I technically have a full season left. I'm not entirely sure I want to be done running. Like, would you be open to me being on the team for the first year and being your volunteer for the second year? And he was like, well, let me think about it. Let me talk about it. I'll hit you back. A couple days later, he called me back and he was like, like I have a spot in my hurdle group. If you'd like to be in it, like I'd be happy to have you. And that was like, whoa, like we're really like, because I had pretty much after COVID, I had mentally kind of prepared to just shut it down and be good. Because I was ready to, well, for one, I didn't think I'd run again and be done with all that. So, after that conversation with coach, I think the next day I started my fall or my summer training. And at that point, I was still a little unsure if I wanted to do it. But then me starting fall training without thinking about it kind of answered my question for me. So, got into it, went to Indiana in I guess that would have been the fall of 2020, I think. And, we're still under like super tight COVID protocols and all that. But, joined the team, ran for a year, and just kind of rolled right into it, which, being an athlete in the Big Ten was fun. And a great experience. I met some amazing people. And, during that year, I knew the next year I'd be the volunteer. So I was probably back in like kind of that mindset I was with Boogie, like asking a couple questions.
Yeah, I wondered.
Like, yeah. Picking Ed's brain a little bit, but still very much like bought into being an athlete and being part of that process. So yeah, that's kind of what that next year looked like. And then the following year, the last year of my master's, which would have been 21, 22, is the year I was the volunteer for Ed there at IU.
Now, our coaching styles, and what's interesting, that's only 2 years ago. So you, in your own right, are still formalizing your coaching style. You still are, quote unquote, very impressionable at this point. Hopefully you are. Hopefully you are. You're too young to be just locked in that this is how I do it and this is how I'm always going to do it. And all of us, Ed, Boogie, name a coach, we're an amalgamation of a lot of people that have poured into us and then our own ideas and thoughts, right? So we had Boogie's brother Chris on the podcast, and while I wanted to know a lot about Boogie because I know Boogie and know what he has done, I wanted to keep this very focused on Chris. But you can't ignore, here are 2 very high level coaches that are brothers. Like, I assume y'all talk shop. And so, to hear their differences and how they, talk about things, that's how, they had a much deeper connection as brothers, but that's how we are as coaches, right? We're always talking, hey, how you do that? How'd that work out for you, et cetera. And, gives you ideas like, maybe I should tweak this, tweak that. You are learning from Boogie. You then, so that and you go back, you have a little bit of high school coach still in you as well. You know what you did there. Then you layer this, huge lesson, this huge teacher in Boogie. You get some months of Justin in there.
Mm-hmm.
So you start, oh, okay, well, maybe I do like that a little bit better than what we did here. And now you go to an Ed Bethia. Now, I don't want to compare Ed and Boogie in regards to training. Now, I have zero interest in that because while I do believe there is the right ways to coach certain events, there is certainly the art of coaching. So there are differences.
Yeah.
But I'm interested to learn as you're going through that year of, I know you're an athlete, and I don't just want to disrespect that. A Big Ten athlete, it's amazing. But the very next horizon is coaching. So you are looking at
Yeah.
this in a wholly different way than any other athlete on that team probably heard
Yeah.
How did you notice subtle differences, maybe major differences? Were you kind of picking that up of like, oh, that's different than what Boogie did, and maybe that is the better way for me to do it, or what, were you kind of picking that up, or was it I'm a Boogie disciple? We call ourselves Boo disciples, all of us guys that learn from Boo Schexnayder, or were you just like, I'm a Boogie guy, that's how it's going to go down? I know, Ed, you like to do this, that's great, I'm learning from you, but when the brass hits the road, I'm going to fall back to Boogie principles here.
Yeah. I very much did notice differences. The biggest reason I picked Ed is because when I was on the phone, I felt like when I was on the phone asking him about being a volunteer, I felt that Ed was willing to invest in me. Like he pretty much said it. I believe in investing in the next generation and teaching people and mentoring in that sense. And that was like, I think from that moment, I was like, that's my dude. I want someone who I can pepper with questions and I can sit and have like these talks with and really, really debate things. And Ed was the first one that was like I'm willing to do that. Um, but then like as I got into it, very much so, very different in a lot of different ways. And I liked that personally. I'm a person who I like to I think holistic things are important, like looking at things as a whole. And I knew Boogie had one style. He's one person, he has one training style. I knew Ed was very different as a person, didn't know about his training style yet. But I was like, if I can learn from Boogie and then I can go learn from Ed, and I fall somewhere in the middle, well, those are two pretty good names to be sandwiched between. So I think I wanted to go to Ed because I knew he was a different style than what I was used to. That's a good way to say it. It was different than what I learned and what I knew. And I was like, if I can learn from this guy who looks at things differently and operates differently, that's going to make me much better and much more well-rounded. Um, as I got into it, I realized like Ed's style is different than Boogie's, and in several different ways, and just the way he operates and the way he thinks. And I liked that. I loved picking that apart, and observations I made from a distance or things I talked to him about. I felt like I learned a lot from that experience just because Ed thinks differently. So yeah, that was a good eye opener for me.
Yeah, and what I appreciate about an Ed, I like when you said, hey, you called them up and you're like, hey, I still have a year of eligibility left here. Would you be open to this? A lot of coaches, I shouldn't say that. Some coaches are going to make that answer right then and there for many reasons. Like they're yes or no. They already know their hurdle group is full or whatever. Ed is someone who always is very intentional. And
Yeah.
so when he said, hey, let me think about it and I'll get back to you. It's like, oh yeah, of course, that's what Ed said. Ed went back and was like, okay, let me think about this. Cause first of all, if I bring this kid on, I want to make sure I'm doing what's right for him. Like, do I have the
Mm-hmm.
time to have a volunteer? Meaning it's not just, I'm gonna have a volunteer and throw you out there and tell you to blow the whistle here or stop the clock here. Like I'm gonna teach you how to become a better coach.
Yeah.
And if I don't have that time because of the other things that are going on, well, then it's not fair to say, hey, come out here to Bloomington, right? So I love that
Right.
intentionality from him. And maybe you pick that up as far as like a calling card for you as well. As like, okay, hey, you can't say yes to everything, but before you
Yeah.
commit yes or no to something, be intentional. Think about what that is going to actually look like and what you hope to get out of somebody or give in to someone as well.
Yeah.
So
I think, go ahead.
no, go.
I was gonna say, I think one line Ed had said that stuck with me. He was like, "You can come be my volunteer, and you can be as involved or as little involved as you would like to be. Like you tell me what you want your experience to be, and we can work with it." And I was like, "Man, you don't know who you're getting. I want to go all the way in on this thing. I'm here to figure it out." And I think that was like one of the things he said where I was like, "Yeah, like I got to work with this guy. I got to learn from him."
So what was it like? How involved did he allow you to be? Were you just the stereotypical clipboard holder, which I've never seen many coaches hold clipboards. I don't know why we say that.
Right. Stopwatch holder
I hear
might
the
be the better
stopwatch
phrase.
holder, which I'm also like, I don't know.
Yeah.
Doesn't everybody do? I see head coaches holding stopwatches. I'm not sure that's a
Right.
a delineation of what a volunteer versus full-time coach. How involved were you,
Right.
and how much did you learn there?
Yeah. So this would have been second year at IU, completely done being an athlete, complete switch. And, we had sat down either in the office or at a local shop there and basically just talked through it. He's like, what do you want out of the experience? What are you comfortable doing? What are you uncomfortable doing? Stuff like that. And I think to start out, it was pretty general, like I wasn't just placing cones and holding a stopwatch. Like I was still figuring out the odds and ends. But I think Ed let me do a lot of things, whether I asked for him or not. I think I showed my intention, and Ed let me in on a lot of things that a lot of other people probably wouldn't. Ed and the whole staff at IU for that matter. Like Helmer let me sit in on staff meetings each week, and I never said a single word in any staff meeting I went to, but I was a fly on the wall, and I learned a lot being in there. I figured out how it all worked, and what the details were and what was important, and stuff like that. So Ed let me do a lot of things like that I don't think I probably would have gotten a lot of other places. And as the year went on, like that kind of grew, and I wasn't necessarily writing training plans, but I was very much giving my input. There might have been a day or two where he was like, "Hey, the workout's yours today. Like, you write the workout," type of a thing. And then I handled one thing I did appreciate about Ed is he gave me the responsibility of like core plyo program. So I think it was 2 days a week. He was like, you have them for the first this amount of time of practice, like get your core in and set a plyo program. And that's where I really started learning what it's like to set a program, and ups and downs and all that stuff. So that was the kind of responsibility he was willing to give me that I think started to figure stuff out. And I think where I really learned is when he'd pop something on me, and sometimes it'd be something I was uncomfortable with, and he'd be like, um, like, I specifically remember one. He's like, "Hey, they got 10 minutes left to practice. Like, fill that 10 minutes, basically. Like, fill it with some kind of a cool down routine." And I had to think of it right on the spot. And he knew he knew I hated that stuff, and he did it anyway. But I think I grew a lot through it. So he very much started to like hand me off a little responsibility that taught me how to program, how to recover, how to build workouts or whatever. And then in addition to sitting in on staff meetings, one of the biggest things they did for me was they took me. I don't think there was a single meet I didn't travel to that year. And as the volunteer, like especially as I get into this profession, I'm like, that doesn't happen a lot.
Right.
So I very, very much owe Bethea and Helmer a lot for those experiences. Like in IU, like they made a great travel schedule. We were going Raleigh relays, we were going to Tennessee relays, heading down to Florida relays, stuff like that. So like I was getting this great experience at these meets I hadn't been in because I hadn't been in a Big Ten schedule before. So just how much Ed and the staff allowed me to be involved was crazy. And I think that was like looking back on it, I don't know how I would have gotten a better experience anywhere
Right.
else.
What's the now we don't talk X's and O's, so stay with me on this one. What's that thing I've seen? S plus R equals, I think it's O. It's stress plus recovery equals, I see it on the internet all the time. Maybe it's E plus R. I don't remember what it is. Here's what I always used to say. I used to do the S plus R equals A. So stress, recover, and that'll get you adaptation, right? So where I'm getting at is I love Coach Bethea's stressing you. Yeah, we think about it as how to make a hurdler faster. Well, how do we make coaches better? Stress the volunteer, the assistant coach, the rookie coach of like, hey, they got 10 minutes left, running through a cool down. And it's now go. Like that's stress.
Right.
Not only stress of like, I got to think of something like that, but also like, he's got to be cool with it. Like I got to do something that Ed's gonna be like, all right, you're not killing my athletes. I'm okay with this,
Yeah.
And then you come, you recover, you come off that and go, okay, so he liked that. Maybe he gave you some feedback on it's like, hey, I probably wouldn't have done this, or maybe I'd have done more. Hey, I like this. And it's like, oh, that's your recovery. That's your, okay, that's it going in your head. Like follow that for next time. And that's how you adapt and how you become a better coach. So it's really interesting as coaches, we think about this, the stimulus of the athletes was the same for us, we're still
Right.
human beings. We're just in a different role. We're coaches now instead of athletes. So as you were
Yeah.
describing that, I was like, oh yeah, that's just coaching. That's just coaching the coach now instead of coaching the athlete.
Very
Uh,
much so.
what an amazing year. And, Indiana, beautiful campus, great school, great program, lots of history there. I have deep ties. Former head coach there, Marshall Goss, was a mentor of mine. It's like a father to me, helped me really understand coaching and coaching hurdlers specifically. And, used to work the Indiana camps every summer with Ed
Yeah.
and Wayne Pate back then. It was just great time. Randy Heisler, amazing people, and amazing program and coaching staff there. What do you do after that? I mean, that's got to be like, how do I just stay here? But you can't. So
Yeah.
what ends up happening?
Right. So actually, the initial plan for what would have been last year was be a volunteer at IU one more year. Like I had been in the scene 1 year, um, and Ed was willing to give me more responsibility. What that looks like, we never really got to because it kind of ended short. But I had someone in my corner who was willing to teach me, was willing to let me kind of figure some things out on my own. So the plan was to stay at IU for another year. Grab a job on the side and just figure it out. But then Brock Moreau, who was at New Orleans last year, Brian Johnson goes to La Tech. Brock jumps up from associate cross country coach to head coach of the program. Well, I had known Brock because he was on Boogie's staff for a year at Northridge.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So I had met Brock there. And obviously during that time it was coach athlete dynamic. But I thought, me and Brock, like always, he was a younger guy. We always just got along really well, like it was easy to bounce off each other, like had good talks, like it was just super chill. And we had done that young people thing where we just kept up over social media in the years between. And then I had actually seen him the year prior, the year IU hosted regionals. We hosted I guess that would have been the East region 2 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
I saw Brock there. He had a couple 800 guys in the meet. And I saw him and just got to chat with him real quick. Didn't think much of it. I don't think he did either. But then that summer, Brian leaves UNO. Brock gets leveled up. And one day I get a little text on Instagram like, hey, can you call me? And I was like, yeah, sure. Like, why not? And I give him a call and he's like, hey, I got this sprints hurdles jumps position open. I know you're young, but like, I want you to interview for it. I think it might be a good chance for you. And so that's how we kind of rolled into what this year looked like. And,
Now pause
going
there.
in,
Pause there,
yeah,
because this is a big deal, right? I mean, you've been interning and volunteering. You made the statement, I'm going to stay another year and just figure it out, get a job on the side. All things that I don't like, by the way. And what I mean by that is I don't like volunteer coaches. I want you to get paid. I just
yeah,
we're overly dependent in my mind in track and field coaching on volunteers. I just think we should be paying more and more people aside. But so you get this call from Brock and he's like, hey, I want you to apply for this job for my job, to be my assistant. What did that feel like? I mean, that's a different activity than I applied for a job. When someone asks you to
yeah.
apply, that's different. You don't know that because you have no idea. You're still a rookie in the whole job at this moment, but you get this call. What'd that feel like?
I mean, it was kind of like a, whoa, are we sure moment? And I remember first person I called, Ed Bethea, and I'm like, man, Brock called me, like he wants me to take this interview. Like, do you think I'm ready? And I kid you not, I'm pretty sure Ed's answer was, well, no, you're probably not ready, but I think you should take the interview because I think you can figure it out. Um, like I think if you get it, you can figure it out anyway. Um, so like it was cool to get it. It was cool to me that Brock thought of me
Mhm.
and thought highly of me, knowing that I hadn't had my own group yet. Like I hadn't had that experience, but he was willing to at least put me in the candidate pool and see what I had to say. So obviously, like I owe a ton to Brock for that, but it was really cool to be like, dang, like in a month we could be doing this for real. Like I could have my life could look whole completely differently, and I could be living in New Orleans, which is wild.
Yeah, that's his own thing,
Um,
right? Yeah.
yeah,
What,
yeah. So
what did you do? We have, excuse me, lots of listeners who, we have a fairly large constituent of college athletes that listen to the podcast. And so some percentage of them are going on to become coaches one day. Even if they're not, they're going to go on to be something as a professional, whether it's a banker, a business owner, et cetera. They're going to have to interview for the first time at some point. This is your first, like, I'm going to call it official interview. What did you do to prepare? What did you, looking back at it now, what did you like? Oh man, I kind of wish I wouldn't have said that. It all worked out, thank goodness. But what are some things you're like, I wish I'd have actually did a little bit more preparation on this side of it. Help us with the actual, we don't talk about this in the track and field coaching world very much. Tell us about the interview process.
Yeah. So what I did was I leaned on the people I knew had my back. Boogie Johnson, Ed Bethea. So I called Boogie. I was like, hey, I'm gonna take this interview. I knew he knew Brock well. And I was just like, I've never done one of these. Like, do you have any tips? Because I'm kind of shooting in the dark here. He took me through it and he was like, touch on this, touch on that. You can probably expect him to talk about this. But like, I think essentially he was like, don't try to be someone you're not, be yourself and be what you are. And then, try to answer the questions the best you can, but like, don't stress about it, like it's going to be all right. And then I sat down with Ed, went over to his house one night. I think it was the night before the interview, and had like a 2-hour intervention, if you want to call that, of just like interview prep. Like, you kind of generally know the interview questions that are going to get asked, philosophy, views on this, views on that. What would you do in this situation? And we basically just ran through it all. And I just took a ton of notes. Like I think I still have the notepad with like 3 pages worth of notes of me just jotting down like thoughts and pointers and stuff like that. So that was kind of like my interview prep, going into it, and I didn't know what to expect. I knew it was going to be Brock and a sport administrator, and that probably freaked me out a little bit because I hadn't interacted with administrators a lot.
Right.
But yeah, like I just leaned on the people that I knew had my back. And then ultimately, like it was just, let's be ourselves. And I think, if I could give one tip off the top to someone who's about to take their first interview, is dress like you want the interview. Dress appropriately. Like, I think that's a small detail that gets overlooked. I remember I had my interview at maybe 11 and I worked a little bit that morning, and then I got off work. I went to Dick's and bought an Under Armour polo because I knew UNO was Under Armour. And I was like, small detail, but maybe it pays off, Went to Dick's, I buy this polo, get on there with my Under Armour polo, and I was like, if nothing else goes right, at least I look decent and I look put together. So that was kind of what the prep looked like. But it was really just trying to find confidence in myself and being like, you know what, I'm gonna just be me. And if they like me, cool. And if they don't, I got my spot here in Indiana and I'll be okay.
I love the shirt example there, because that, for me, even if I didn't care, like, if whether I was an Under Armour school or not, I'd be like, oh, he at least did some research. Like, yeah. I want someone who's going to do some research in their position, right? So I'm like, oh, at least he's paying attention. Like that to me, even if it's not I'm writing it down like, oh, this guy wore Under Armour, this guy wore Nike,
right.
There's just a little bit of like, oh, okay, this guy, attention to detail, does a little research. Did they note that at all during the interview?
They didn't note it during the interview, but after I got the job going on, I had talked to Brock a little bit, and he was like, well, because I was, so through the whole process, I wasn't sure if it was my job and I was just interviewing, or if like I was going against people.
Yeah.
Turns out I was going against people, and he was like, well, you were out of like our 3 finalists, like you showed up and you had a polo on, and these people maybe didn't look the same or whatever. So it was mentioned like in some way.
Yeah.
And I thought back and I was like, if I would have hopped on that call with an Indiana polo on, they wouldn't have noticed that. So maybe they'll notice it the other way, So he did say something about it at one point, but I think that's just a general good practice to have.
100%. It's hard to overdress for an interview.
Right.
It's certainly easy to underdress, and
very much so.
You will never get points docked from you for overdressing, but you absolutely could get knocked for underdressing. I'm of the statute. I mean, I don't know. I try not to judge people, so I honestly don't care if you show up in a tank top. I may say, hey, just so you know, if you get the job, we're a polo kind of company, just so you're aware. But I'm not gonna judge you. Heck, that may be the only shirt that kid owns. I don't know. So I don't want to judge on that side. But great point about dress for the job you want, like you want the
Yeah.
job. What and I love that you weren't interviewing for the job that was already yours, that you had competition, right? Because for your own
Yeah.
satisfaction, once you found that information, it's a little bit like, oh, okay, yeah,
One hundred percent.
you wanted me, like I won.
One
We're
hundred percent.
we're
Yes.
competitive people as coaches, like, oh, I won, okay, that's good. Not like, oh, this was given to me, and I'm grateful, but okay, you gave it to me. No,
Right.
you earned and deserved, man. I like that.
Yeah.
So what was it like? I asked you, what was it like when he called you to say, hey, I want you to put your hat in the ring. I want to interview you. That's one thing. What was it like when you got the call of, hey, the job is yours? Yeah, I can see that smile right there.
Yeah.
That's a
Yeah.
pretty fun phone call.
Yeah. Yeah. It was cool. I think I interviewed on like a Friday or something like that. It got back around to Monday, Tuesday, and I'm like, maybe it's not me. Like, because I came out of the interview, I was like, if I don't get it, it's not because of it's not because of me. I killed that one. Got to Tuesday, I was like, maybe it's just not me. It just wasn't meant to be. And then I think
Oh,
Brock calls me on a
the stories we
Wednesday.
tell ourselves. I love this. I love
Right,
this.
right. You can convince yourself into anything if you think on it hard enough. I think Brock calls me on a Wednesday and he's like, "Hey, man, I'm gonna just get straight to it. Like, you're my guy if you want the position." And he
Oh,
was like, talk to your people, do whatever you need to do. But take some time and then give me an answer. And hang up the phone. First person I call, Ed Bethea. I'm like, man, you wouldn't believe this. And it's funny. It's funny you said win the interview, right? Because the last thing Ed said as I left his house the night before my interview was, "Hey, just win it. Like, just try to win the interview, and then worry about everything that comes after." When I picked up that phone, I was like, "Hey, man, I won this thing. Like you wouldn't believe what happened." So it was cool, and he just sits back and laughs, like, "Oh man, of course you did. You're gonna leave me without a volunteer, aren't you?" I was like, "Man, I'd hate to do it." But really, like, actually, I smile a lot because I haven't really thought back on that moment. It's just been full speed ahead, but it's cool to think about that, and the whole process, and just how good it felt to be like, you know what, I won that interview. And at the time, I didn't know if I won it against anyone else or not, but I was like they think I'm the person for this job, and they want me in here.
yeah. There's so many aspects of your story there that I think are really important for others to hear as well. One of the things that I wanted to make sure we didn't gloss over this, we've talked about this a few times in different interviews here on the podcast, and that's about being yourself in the
Yeah.
interview, right? You know, it if you are yourself during the interview, it's always a positive on how it works out, whether you get the job or not, right? So if you are yourself and you get the job, you can be very comfortable, like, okay, well, who I am is who I am. That means I get to be that way on my job. If
Yeah.
you decide to go in and try to act like what you think the head coach or an administrator might want, and you get the job, well, you are who you are, meaning you're not going to be able to act that way for very long. And you're going to revert back to whoever you actually
Yes.
are, which means you're
Yes.
probably going to rub the head coach in an assistant coach position the wrong way. It's like, well, wait a minute, this wasn't you during the interview process. Why are why
Right.
are you like this now? So that person, the head coach, is not going to be happy. You're not going to be happy because it's like, well, now,
Right.
I got to be who I am. Well, you weren't that during the interview, so that's not fair to anybody. So if you don't
Right.
get the job because you represent yourself as who you are, you actually are who you are. That's a good thing. That means you dodged a bullet, they dodged a bullet. Everybody is in the right place at the right time for that. So I'm reminded of. I think this is how all interviews should occur. I think Dave Smith was on the podcast, the head coach of Oklahoma State, and if I remember the story right, he drove from Des Moines down to Stillwater interviewing for the job.
Yep.
And it was like, oh man, there's no BSing for 3 hours or whatever. The drive is like,
Right.
you can only handle acting like someone else for maybe 30 minutes at best. Your real self comes out on the road trip. And I was like, oh man,
Yeah.
that's how all interviews should be. Let's get in the car, we're gonna drive for a
Yeah.
couple hours and chat, and we're gonna see who you really
Right.
are. So
Right.
I thought that was really important, the advice you gave there. Man, I'm just going to be myself. Um, if it works out, awesome. I hope so. This seems like a place. I wouldn't interview for a place that I don't think I should be at. So I really hope I do get the job.
Right.
And if I don't, luckily you did have something to fall back on. You had a position waiting for you there in Indiana. But even if you didn't, well, then okay, then the right place will come tomorrow or the next day.
Right.
The other thing I wanted to touch on, when you talk about you interviewed on Friday and Monday comes, Tuesday comes, Wednesday probably morning comes, you're like, man, maybe I didn't get it. We is I'm been very blessed to hire a lot of people here in my 17 years here at Yale Athletics. It never goes as fast as the candidate wants, nor as
Right.
fast as the person who is hiring ever wants either.
Right.
It never does. I've had people, I remember interviewing, he's no longer with us, great guy. And he was the person I was choosing. Like, no, it was over after the interview. I was like, this is the guy.
Right.
But I was hiring two people, and so I was trying to figure out, well, what am I going to do with my second slot, and getting everybody who we weren't choosing, get them okay that, hey, I'm sorry, we're not choosing you, but how can we help you, blah blah blah, all that kind of stuff. And I remember he would call me and like, hey, just want to check in, like, we interviewed, and I was like, oh man, this is the guy I want. Like, that's the guy I want. It's the guy who's going to follow up, right? I mean, in a sales position, that's and I was like, oh yeah, hey man, everything's good. Just relax. I'll call you. I know you're worried because I haven't called you, but don't worry. It's all okay. Like I was trying to tell him, like, you got the job, bro, without telling, I couldn't tell him.
Yeah.
And, 2 days later he calls me and I was a little bit like, all right, man, you got to back off. but I also get it.
Right.
I get where you're coming from. The stories we tell, it never happens as fast as either people. No. There's always, especially with hiring, there's always red tape, HR to go through, etc. So I think that's a great lesson for people too, about, hey, when you interview, and you can, I think you should ask, like, hey, when should I expect a call one way or the other?
Yeah,
that definitely, way you have a good time. If they say, hey, by Wednesday you should, and now Wednesday comes and goes, now on Thursday I feel like you have complete permission to call up and be like, hey, I'm just checking in. You thought you might have a decision by Wednesday. Of course, I know life happens. What are we thinking here? That kind of thing. So but yeah, when you're telling that, I was like, oh man, the stories we tell ourselves. They didn't call me immediately back. Oh my God, I didn't get the job. Right. So you get the job, and now you're going. I mean, you've got a crazy across the world path for such a young guy here. Indiana to California, back over to Indiana. Now you're going to a pretty special and unique city. You're going to New Orleans at the University of New Orleans. What did you think? It's a I don't want to say it's a culture shock, because it might not have shocked you, but it's a culture change. What did you think when you got down there and actually started kind of getting in the muck, your first full-time paid track and field coaching position?
Yeah, I mean, I was excited. Like, I think I was offered the job on maybe like August 2nd or 3rd or somewhere in there, early August, right? And I probably had like they said, be here by September 1st. So I had like a square month just about. And the amount of prep I did in that time is insane to look back on. Like, the amount of things I put in place, just trying to make a plan and consider myself prepared, even though you're never going to be for the time you walk in there. But it was just a lot. It was a lot to get going. And I was nervous, to be honest. Like, I was ready, like, let's just get to it, so I can settle in and feel good. But I think, we talk about the culture down here, and just like away from track and field, away from athletics, collegiate at all. I'm moving in. First day, I have the U-Haul backed up in my driveway, and a maintenance guy comes to do something in the house. First thing he does is, hey man, you need some help unpacking? And I'm like, oh, I like it here. Like, these people are like, this guy I had known for 30 seconds just asked if he wants me to, or if I would like him to, take the rest of however many hours and just help me move all my stuff in the house. I was like, like, we're going to be okay. These are my kind of people. People are my people.
Awesome.
So that was like, that'll just be something that sticks with me, and he'll never know that mattered or I even noticed. But kind of from there, I was like,
why,
cool.
Why not?
Right.
Well, no, why not? What?
Why will he never know?
Yeah, man.
Yeah. Never saw him again.
Never
saw him. Yeah. I think my landlord changed maintenance guys 2 weeks later.
Okay.
Never saw him again.
Okay. That I'll buy that, because I really am working extremely hard on the positivity side of life, right? From social media, we social media is negative, blah, blah, blah. Like, well, it doesn't have to be. You can drown out negativity with positivity. So I'm on that front, right? And so anytime I get a chance, when someone says, that person will never know, I'm like, well, why not? Go tell them. Like, you should tell them. So I understand if you can't find them, though. I won't put you on a private detective, go hunt them down. But okay, I just wanted to check. I was like, why not, man? We need to be, when someone, when kind people are my people, man, then tell them that, so they will feel emboldened to be more kind to other people. So
absolutely.
So what was it like? I've had your experience now of the first time someone calls you to apply for a job, you get the job. What was first day of practice like? You got all these, I don't know, 10, 20, 30 kids in front of you. And it's like,
Yeah,
oh, there's no Ed Bethia. Oh, no. Okay. Oh, there's no Boogie. Oh,
right.
no, it's me. They're looking at
It's just
me.
me. Yeah. Yeah. It was fun. I think first thing I did, well, one of the things I did within that month was I researched every kid in the group I was walking into, knew their names, knew what they ran, knew where they came from, knew what they looked like. Cause I was like, I'm going to show up on day one and I'm going to call them by name. And that might get their attention. Um, so it was like, I think that probably played in my favor a little bit. I think they kind of realized like I was a little bit serious about it, had a structure to my plan and everything. And of course, you sit there and think through it in your head a million times. I'll say this and I'll say this and I'll do that. None of that happens. It never goes that way for all those coaches that are going to be coaches eventually. It never goes that way. Um, but then it was just enjoyable. Like obviously you spend a certain amount of time earning anyone's trust. No one's going to trust you off the rip. Um, and that first month was probably like, are they going to trust me? Do I know what I'm doing? They're asking that. I'm asking that. All this. Um, but once we settled in, like I was given a really solid group of kids, both athletically and as people. Brian Johnson had built a great group down here, and that was one of the reasons I was willing to take the job, is because I was like, how many other first time jobs am I going to walk into a group where I got kids this talented? Um, and that I can really work with and really work at a high level. So it was fun to get to know the kids. Like I enjoyed just getting to know them and realizing how they worked and how they responded and what they did like and what they didn't like. And that first month, like it was an adjustment. Like I did some stuff where they were probably like, "What are we doing?" But I knew what we were doing and I knew why we were doing it. But it was just new to them. So that first month was interesting and kind of shifty, but all the credit in the world to those kids because they took to me and I think they started to trust me eventually and kind of buy into what I had to say.
Now, Brian Johnson, also a good friend. Love Brian a lot, and excellent coach, amazing athlete, even better coach, and even better human being, in my opinion.
Yeah.
I remember back when I coached, so early 2000s, you were like a sixth grader or something. And, and I remember when I left Ball State University to go to Mississippi State. So this is before cell phone, and social media the way it is and all that, before social media, really. And so great Brian Fetzer, also Gill Athletics podcast alum, took my position. He, took the assistant's job from me. And I remember I had some of my girls, my high jumpers specifically, calling me saying, "Hey, we're not doing things the right way." We had a lot of success in the high jump and things like that. And luckily I didn't do a lot of things right as a coach, but I did do this right. I remember saying, "Hey, he's your coach now. Like
Yeah.
you'll do better by listening. Even if you think he's doing it wrong, I have no clue how this guy coaches." I go, "But even if it's wrong, but you believe in him, you'll do well. Like that'll be way better than you not believe in him."
Yeah. Yeah.
And so luckily that worked out. So, but what I'm trying to get at is, 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old kids get very attached, especially if they have success. And I know Brian had a lot of success.
Yeah.
How did
Yeah.
you combat well, that's not how Brian did it. How did you, I think that's something that we don't necessarily, again, talk about as coaches very often, of how you earn that trust. How do you, sometimes maybe, I don't know, you tell us, sometimes maybe you just have to ignore it and be like, "Hey, you're going to have to figure this out on your own. Like I care for you, but
Right.
I can't make you buy in. You're going to have to buy in or not." How did you work on overcoming, a former coach who was a really good coach? It'd be a lot easier if coaches were like terrible, and it's like, "Oh, thank God you're here. Brian Johnson
Right.
sucked." In reality, it's like, "Man, Brian Johnson was awesome. How are you going to live
Yeah.
up to this?"
Yeah. I think that goes back to a question I asked Boogie right as I got into this deal. I was like, "Boog, like you're," I said it this way too. I was like, "You're old now, right? Like these people know you know what you're doing, right?" But when you weren't, like when you were the new guy on the block, how do you get people to trust you? Like, how do you get these athletes to buy into what you're saying? And he was like, "When you're young, you have to explain everything. Like you have to give details and you have to explain why you're doing it and what it's for." So I took that to heart all the way through. And that's what I did when I got in. I was like, "Look, we're going to do a lot of stuff you guys don't know why we're doing it because I have a different style than what Brian did. but just come ask me. Like, let's talk about it. I will tell you why we do. Like, there's not a thing in my program that I won't be able to defend or won't have a reason for. So I just spent a lot of time talking to them. Like, I had individual meetings with first each one, which I think is pretty standard. But I had individual meetings with each one my first weekend, and just explained to them like my philosophy and what we were doing, and stuff like that. So I just tried to be detailed. I tried to explain reasons, and if I said something at practice and I could see it that it didn't hit, or they're like, why, I would instantly give an explanation. But I also think, kind of to what you said, like there's some times where it's like you have to ignore it and you have to just do your thing because like because you believe in it. And if you believe in it, then they will believe in it. So I think that's how I kind of tried to get over that initial hump. But another thing, and the most credit to Brian, as you said, great person. I think this showed it to me right off the bat. Brock walks into my office on like day 4, and he's like, "Hey, Brian called me, and he said like if you need anything, just call him. Like if you want to know anything about any of the kids, what they're used to, all this, like what works well, just give him a call, and like he's happy to talk about it." And I did. Like I ended up talking to Brian a couple times throughout the year. If I would get stuck on someone or we were having a problem with something, and I was like, this is something that like experience fixes, I'd call Brian. I'd be like, "Hey, this is happening. Like, do you have any advice how to handle it with person X?" And man, just all the credit to that dude, because he is a great person. He didn't even flinch. He was like, "Man, there are no secrets over here. Like, I'll tell you anything you want to know." And it helped me greatly. Like a lot of my success within the first year is owed to some of the conversations I had with him, because he just helped me figure out the people I was working with as much as he did the athletes I was working with.
Man, come on. That's the kind of coach I want my kids to work for. That is the
Absolutely.
definition of selfless. I mean, it's
Yeah.
easy to be selfish there. Like, look, man, I got my own program now.
Right.
You on your own, dog. Like, you got to, no
Yeah.
one helps
Yeah.
me. You got to figure it out. And instead, it's
Yeah.
like, hey, man, you need help. That
100%.
that shows someone who cares about those kids, like truly,
Yes.
not just says it, but lives it and says, hey, man, you need help. I
Yeah.
care about those kids so much. If you need help, let me know. Maybe I can help you. I had them for a few years, so maybe I know, what button to
Yeah.
push or what to say, what not to say, whatever, stylistically,
Yeah.
etc. So I love that story, man. We need
Yeah.
more of that. That's
I
great.
agree.
Absolutely fantastic.
I agree.
Fantastic. What yeah, we touched on it there about, you can't convince anybody to do anything. They've got to come around to their own
Yeah.
decisions and conclusions. It's the same in sales. Sometimes people get into sales and they think, oh, I'm going to make Ben, I'm going to convince him he needs to buy gill equipment over competitors, right? And it's like, you're not that good. But you don't like Ben makes up his own mind, insert any other
Right.
coach. You make up your own mind. So we're just here to serve,
Right.
give you the layout of the land, and you get to make the decisions and, ask your questions,
Yeah.
and we'll answer them fairly and honestly. But convincing someone, I don't think so. That's used car
Yeah.
salesman stuff, right? Like, hey, I want this car
Yeah.
over here. Yeah, but let me talk you into this one because it's better for me
Right.
if you pick this one. Bull crap. Make up your own mind. And
Yeah.
that's what you do out there. So I love that for your athletes as well. Some
Yeah.
of them are not going to buy in. It's hard to get
Right.
100% buy-in from 18 to 22-year-olds. Heck, they don't even know
It is.
who they're dating tomorrow, what school they're going to be at tomorrow. How in the
Right.
world do you think you're going to get them to get 100% buy-in? It ain't happening.
Yeah.
Sorry. And the
Yeah.
sooner you can maybe realize that, the better, more satisfied you can be in your career and what you're doing there. So how did this first year go last year? I mean, that's a big year. You're in New Orleans,
Yeah.
first year full time again. Like I said, you look left, there's no Ed. You look right, there's no Boogie. Luckily, you still had them on speed dial, but again, they're staring
Right.
at you face to face. How'd that first year go for you?
Man, it was a lot of fun. Like when I think every time someone asked me the question, like, how's it going last year? I was like, you know what? I'm doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing, exactly where I'm supposed to be doing it at. Like, I had that feeling. And not to say, like, in no way am I saying, like, it was perfect, Nothing is. And like you asked Brock, I had my ups and downs, and I had my times of struggle. But man, looking back retrospectively, it was fun. Like, I just had fun. I had fun building my own program and putting in things that I had always dreamed about putting in and I thought were effective. But also learning like things I was like, oh, great idea. Like, let's get to this. And it flops. And I'm just like, yeah, we're not doing that again. So just learning on my own in a lot of ways was a good time. Had a great, successful indoor meet. Had my first conference champ in the women's long jump, which admittedly going into last year didn't know a dang thing about jumping. So I was proud of that one and excited about that. I was scared of recruiting. I was like, how am I ever going to convince any of these kids I know what I'm talking about? Had an awesome recruiting fall and signed some great ads for the spring and so on and whatnot. Um, and then outdoor season, man, outdoor season was fun. By the time we got to outdoor conference, like you talk about finding a weekend where all the pieces come together. I kind of had that weekend. I got lucky on that conference weekend. We just had a great meet. Like we showed up on 3 day conference meet in the Southland. Day one was like, not my best, right? Missed in a few spots, did okay in a few spots. We show up on day two and it's like person hits here, person hits there, everyone hits. And it was just like one of those days where it's like, this is fun. Like this is why I do this, because everyone's just running fast, right and left, jumping far, right and left. And that was a cool, like at the end of the year where like I was struggling by the end of the year. I was like my first full year, I probably went into it a little hot at the beginning of the year. By the end of the year, I was like, I'm fighting this, man. Like I'm having to work through this. It was really, I don't know what word you want to call it. Rewarding is maybe the right word, maybe not. To just sit at the conference meet and see some of the work come together, you know. And obviously, not everyone. It's not 100%, like you said. It's not perfect. Not everyone hits, but like to see the ones that did, it was fun. It was fun to see it all come together. Put a good group through to my first regional meet out in Jacksonville, and that meet was a rough weekend. Our 4x1, missed the national meet by one spot, 0.01, all that, the classic. Just this is tough. But just the year I had as a whole, getting to know the kids, watching the transition, the relationships I built and stuff like that, like wouldn't trade it for anything. Wouldn't trade it for anything. It was great.
Unless you're a decathlete as an athlete and then go on to coach the decathlon, a lot of our coaches are in their first jobs going to coach something that they've never coached before, maybe never even thought about coaching before. You mentioned that with the long jump, with some of the jumps.
Yeah.
How did you overcome that?
Studied like crazy, but also just tried to be realistic about it. I think, talk to my people, obviously. And I started to figure out that there were a lot of things in long jump, triple jump, somewhat in high jump that carry over. Like I think a takeoff step in the hurdles is very similar to a takeoff step in the long jump, and so on and so forth. So I studied a lot and I just thought about it a lot. Like it was just on my mind a lot. And I tried to just kind of put together a plan. Like I would list like 2 or 3 basic things I wanted to do and just kind of build off that. So as I went through my cycles and blah, 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 and that's X's and O's and stuff. But just I'm comfortable when I feel prepared. Try to prepare myself as much as I could and just learn things.
What does studying and preparing look like for you? Is it webinars, books, coaching education, calling up somebody? What does that look like for you?
A little bit of all that, like I'm one to hop on YouTube and just watch through some stuff and stuff like that. But I also like picking people's brains as to what works and what needs to be built in there. And then a couple of college, like coaching courses or whatever you want to call it online. A couple that I thought were useful to have, I went ahead and went for. But yeah, just spending time. I think spending time immersed in that language is important. Because then when you get out there, like you start to form your own language and your own cues and stuff like that. So just trying to figure out the world. Like to me, hurdling is second nature. Like we can sit here and we can talk about anything hurdling and I won't skip a beat. But at the beginning of last year, jumps was a foreign language to me, for the most part. So just trying to familiarize myself with the dialect and the language and just the whole idea of it.
Best way to learn a foreign language is to immerse yourself in that country and the language. I like that word immerse that you used, of like, okay, I'm going to immerse myself in it and absorb as much as I can. And then it's a continual process for the next
100%.
10, 20, 30, 40 years for you there.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a great year. I appreciate your openness and authenticity regarding, like, maybe you went at it a little hard to begin with in the fall, and, it's a long year. There is no I'm not sure there's a profession. There's certainly not a coaching profession that I can think of that's like it. The kids come in, let's call it Labor Day. You're all fall, your indoor season, your outdoor season. God willing, you're going through, call it middle of June for a national championship. Maybe you have a kid make a USA team. Even if you don't, boom, July 1 is right there. And now we're back to recruiting. And then the kids
Right.
are back on campus. And God bless our distance coaches, I think, who, turn it up to 11 on that. They have it even worse.
Right.
Right? They're going to compete in the fall. So
Right.
you have to pace yourself, especially not only pace yourself for the year. Think about this in the same meso microcycles that you're building, right? So you've got to
Yeah.
pace yourself for the year, but you also know that, hey, I've got a 5, 10, 20, 30, 40-year career here. I'd like to make it to 40 years in a coaching career,
Right.
not get burned out in the first 3, 4, 5 years. So there's
Yeah.
I love the, youthful enthusiasm of I'm just going to do it. I'm going to do it all. And it's like, oh man,
Yeah.
I want you to, but I want you to do it over 10 years, not 10
Yeah.
days. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. So you have a great first year. So happy for you that it culminated in a great outdoor conference meet that obviously went very pleasing for you and the coaching staff. And then what happens this summer?
Summer was exciting. Actually I spent time with Boogie this summer. Worked with the pro group quite a bit. He's starting to build a little something over there. Um, so I went and moved to Fort Worth for the summer for a little over a month, maybe, and just worked with him. Made the trip to Eugene for World Trials, all that good stuff.
Wow.
Um, but I like you look at someone who I learned from for 3 years, but I come back this summer and like I think you never stop learning, especially in a gap like that. So I was like, first of all, I just wanted to be back around the professional environment. I think working with pro athletes is like that's something I really enjoy. I love thinking at that level. I think I love operating at that level. And I think there's a lot to learn there. So I had seen him at the end of the year last year to meet and we hung out and talked a little bit and he was like, what, if you want something to do over the summer, like give me a call. Well, the week my region ended, I gave him a call. And we kind of threw it together. So I spent my summer working with Boog, a couple high level athletes over there. That was really enjoyable. And then I guess it would have been second week of July, maybe. I get a call that Brock has Brock has been offered the job at South Carolina, the distance job, and all of a sudden that makes my world look quite a bit different. I wasn't sure, is someone else going to come in? Am I out like altogether? Are they going to replace the staff? Whatnot? But pretty quickly, Brock was like, I'm gonna like recommend they put you up, like they bump you up and you take control of this program. And once again, I'm in the same spot. Like, am I ready for this? No, probably not. But you're gonna be okay. Like you have the right people in your corner. Like these people here want to help you. Like you'll be okay. And maybe I'm sharing more about the process than I should, but that's kind of how it fell together. And then, I'm sitting there with Boogie, like, man, like, you think this is a good idea? He's like, dude, head coach at this age, like, in this experience, like, if you're their guy, make them believe you're their guy. Like, go in there and go for it. So pretty quick, packed my stuff back up, came back to New Orleans um, for an interview with the AD and the sport admin and stuff like that. And back to the whole situation of just win the interview, convince them that they don't need to go look outside of here. They got their guy right here, and that's what I tried to do.
How, you gave us some pretty good insights on an interview for an assistant coaching position. How was it different on the head coaching position?
I think the biggest difference was like we're not talking as much about track and field anymore. Like if you've gotten to this position, they know you can probably coach. They're not worried about your X's and your O's and your philosophies and stuff like that. How can you manage people? Do you know how to manage people? How are you going to help these kids? How are you going to set these kids up for what comes after collegiate sports? How are you going to help this department and be a professional and like represent us in a good way? And it was a lot of that kind of stuff. Like it's a different interview because you have to change the way you think. Like I said earlier, like in that holistic sense, like you're thinking about a few bigger things now, and you got a couple different things on your plate. So that was kind of how the interview changed for me once it was for a head job.
I don't know why I'm asking this, but I feel like I have to with you. Did you wear a polo or did you suit and tie it this one?
I did not suit and tie it. I went
Okay.
polo, nice khakis. I did not suit and tie, which is interesting to think back on. And I think, maybe there was some level of comfortability there.
Yeah, I was going to point that out.
Yeah.
Know your audience is an extremely important philosophy, and
Yeah.
extremely hard if you're interviewing for an institution that you haven't been there at all. You don't know anybody,
Right.
and definitely don't know the panel, right? But you knew your audience, so that's why I was going to put that caveat. If you did say polo shirt, it's like, okay, well, you knew the audience, you knew who was going to interview you. Had maybe
Yeah.
talked to that person many times over a year at that point, so you knew your audience and knew, okay, I'm not expected to suit and tie necessarily. I was just curious because it was
Right.
head coaching titles, like, oh, I guess I better tie
Yeah.
on to this one. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which is also ludicrous for a coach to do, by the way, because you're never in a suit and tie unless you're like a basketball coach. So it's
Right.
also kind of like, why do we do this for our track
Right.
coaches?
Right.
You're never doing this. So, okay.
Yeah.
So they give you, you earn the interim head coaching position. Now, it's
Correct.
It's hard after 200 plus interviews to come up with something new. We've never had an interim head coach. What does that mean? What is that? How do you have to respond to that? Tell us about that interim tag.
Yeah. So, I mean, honestly, initially, I wasn't sure that I liked the interim tag.
Mhm.
I was like, well, do you just not trust me? Like, are you just trying to like kind of pull me along or whatnot?
Remember the
But the more
stories we tell, right? Oh, it's
yeah,
interim. Oh, they didn't tell me
right,
this, but no, that means
right,
they don't trust me. Right. Yep.
exactly. But the more I thought about it, I was like, this might not be such a bad thing. So essentially, what we've agreed on is like, it's my year-long interview. Like, they pretty much agreed, like, the spot is yours for the year. Run this program and show us what you can do. Um, And the more I thought about it, I was like, I like that. Like, I'm a person who, like, the more time you give me with someone, the more time you put me in a situation, the more confident I'm going to feel. Like, I think in time, I show the best of me. And I think in a position like this, like, by the end of the year, like, I intend to put no doubt in their mind, like, they don't have to go searching. Like, they can pull that tag and you got your guy and we're solid. So yeah, like, I kind of came around to the idea, like, it doesn't lock me in. And if I get to the end of this year and for whatever reason I'm like, maybe not the thing for me, like, I'm not paying a massive amount to buy out of a contract or anything like that. um but yeah, I kind of came around to it. I'm like, you know what, it's a head coaching position. The title says head coach and I'm going to take that. um Not a lot of people at this age in this stage get that chance. And I think if I can prove that this is something I can take a hold of and be confident in and rock with, like, there's not much I can't do.
On one hand, I was going to argue the side of that I don't like it, and here's the reason why. Like, I remember when on Twitter when it was announced, I said, "Oh, awesome! Congrats, awesome! Now get rid of the interim. Like, just let's." And I was talking to the New Orleans, not you. It's like, hey man, just
Yeah.
cut this crap out. He's the head, because there's no world I can imagine that you are doing anything different, nor do I think they expect you to be doing anything different. It's like, oh, he's the interim, so we're not going to have him do the budgeting. We'll have our CFO.
Right.
Nope. You're the head coach. You got to get this done. The scheduling, the
Yeah.
recruiting, the vision of the program, etc. All of that. That interim means nothing in that sense. So on the other hand, I can argue the side of like, oh, it doesn't matter interim. It's a job. You are the head coach. Every job is kind of interim, meaning all
In
of
a
us can
way.
be let go tomorrow. So
Yeah. 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 Very much
there's
so.
no guarantees just because you do or don't have the word interim in front of it. You are
Yeah.
absolutely the head coach there. So I'm quite pleased and really happy for you. It's again, that word immersion. What's the best way to learn how to become a head coach? Become a head coach. There is no
Figure it out.
class. I don't care if you're 24 today or you're 44 and it's your first head coaching job. There are still aspects of the job, no matter how well prepared you are and your former head coaches have prepared you along the way, that you just don't know. You just haven't done it. You haven't
Yeah.
done scheduling, you haven't done budgeting, you haven't done equipment purchasing, you haven't done recruiting, you haven't done, and this is a part of track and field coaching and probably all coaching that we don't do and don't talk about. It's kind of I call it like the dirty little secret of the profession of track and field. As a head coach, you hire and fire assistant coaches, but you're never
Yeah.
trained on that. You're never trained on how
Right.
to interview. You're never trained on how to do yearly evaluation. Oh, you got to do yearly evaluations. You ain't trained on how to actually do that in a professional and
Yeah.
correct way to do it. That's fair for the person and for you. But you've got to do all those things. You're not prepared for it until you are immersed and are doing it. So you're getting it's amazing along the way as an athlete and beginning coach, and now as you're really beginning your coaching career, the level of I'm going to say internship, but I don't want that to demean what you're doing. You're getting paid now, but the level of thoughtfulness and education that you've had along the way is really quite accelerated compared to
Yeah.
others in the same year side of you, as years of coaching at this point.
Yeah.
I know it's early. It's when we're recording this, it's the beginning of September. But what has there been a part of being the head coach that has surprised you that you thought was going to be super easy, like, this will be okay for me, but you maybe have struggled a little bit with?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I think it's like, I'll say it as the level of responsibility, but I think it's simpler than that. It's not that heavy. I have this joke, like each time someone walks in my door now, they want something from me. Like they want me to solve a problem. They want me to do this. They want me to do that. And I think it was something that I was like, oh, I can't wait to like have the responsibility. Because I'm a person like put it on my shoulders and I'll take care of it, and I trust myself to do so. And I thought like, yeah, like I can't wait for everyone to come to me and need this and need that. And now I'm like, man, that's a lot. Like it's a lot. A lot of things get filtered to me, and there's a lot of things to handle and decisions to be made. So in the first month, like I'm figuring that stuff out. I'm figuring out that it is probably more than I initially realized, and just something I'm going to have to adjust for as I still try to handle my group that I had, and the responsibilities I had. And I still have these 16, 18 kids in my group that need my full attention daily. So just kind of that balance is a learning process for sure.
Yeah, I think that is a big switch from assistant to head coach. You're right.
Yeah.
Um, someone always needs something from you, or they
Yeah.
in need, not necessarily it's something physical, but it could be a decision. A decision needs to be made.
Right.
You're the head coach. You have to make this decision.
Right.
So what about the reverse side of it? What was something that you thought you might struggle with that you found out it's like, oh, actually, I'm pretty natural at this, or, my experience with this other thing helped me to be a little bit better than I thought. I was a little concerned, but actually it's going to be okay.
Yeah. I would say in that regard, it's kind of actually it's probably something like as simple as like commanding a room or leading a room.
Hmm.
Like we've had our first couple team meetings, and it was like, dang, like leading a meeting is a little different than being in a meeting, and all this and whatnot. But it's like I enjoy it. It's fun to step in the room and like take control of that room and just be confident in who I am and what I have to say and the plan I have. So I've kind of enjoyed that, and getting, just building my vision as a coach of what I want a program to be. Because like a year ago, if you would have asked me if I wanted to be head coach, I would have been like, someday, like not worried about it. Never really thought about that. And then it was suddenly like, what's your vision? What's your plan? Like, what are you going to do with this team? And like, admittedly, I'm figuring that out every day. And it's a plan that is evolving, but it's fun. Like I enjoy that, and I'm confident in it, and I'm confident in what I can build, and the team I can have. So
Yeah, the key word there is build. That's exactly right. Something's already there. Brian built
yeah,
something there. Brock built something, added on to that, and you're continuing on that brick by brick by brick. That's exactly right.
yeah,
It's a great word. It's a positive word, right? Building. We build things. That's a good thing. I love it. Ben, as we wrap up here today, as you put your head coaching cap on, and again, it's so early. It's September for you, for crying out loud. You haven't even had
yeah.
your first meet yet, but I'm curious, what's got you excited about University of New Orleans, your program, University of New Orleans track and field there, and you can put it in 1 year, 5 year, 10 year. I don't know. You got a vision there. What's got you excited about your program?
Um, that's a great question. I think there's a lot that definitely has me excited. Um, I think this program, since Brian took it over, has been trending in a great direction. When Brock took over, we didn't skip a beat. We won the women's cross title. Men were third. Um, Women's team, indoor and outdoor, placed higher than they've ever placed. So I think there's as much talent in the school right now on this team as we've ever had, and I think that's exciting. Um, because I think I'm a person who believes like talent attracts talent, and like where the fast people are, the fast people want to go. So I think we're on an upward trend, but when I step back and look at it, I enjoy the people I'm around each day.
Mhm.
And that's from like my athletes, they're great. Like I really enjoy the team we have. I enjoy getting to interact with the distance runners the same way I do with the sprinters and stuff like that, and having them engage back. I enjoy the culture that has come around since I've been here, and that Brian and Brock helped build. But I also like my administration has my back like something fierce. Kim Gallo is my sport administrator, and her and I in the month, which is weird to say, in the month we've worked together, like it feels like we've gotten tight. Like I really
Awesome.
do trust Kim, and I can lean on her. And then of course Tim Duncan as the AD, like he's trusted me and given me this chance. And when someone puts their trust in me, that's not something I take lightly. So I think just the people I get to work with daily is something I'm excited about, and the direction of this team, athletically, but also like culturally, is something that's just cool. It's something that I'm happy to be in and blessed to be a part of.
When we interviewed one of your mentors, Ed, at the end, he's been coaching for 20 plus years. And I always like to use the analogy of a 400-meter race. And, for a guy like Ed, I'm like, hey, Ed, I know sometimes after 2025, whatever many seasons you've had, it feels like you're nearing the finish line. Like, on the 400-meter runner, it's like, you're at the 350 mark and you see it's right there. When the actual truth is, a guy like Ed is maybe at the 200-meter mark, maybe.
Yeah,
Like there's so
yeah.
much more in front of him to go in his career, God willing, with health, etc. For you, Ben, I don't know, maybe you're in the blocks. You're in the blocks. I'll
I
give you in the
might I might have
blocks.
gotten
You're
there.
not, I don't know that you're in the set position, but
Right.
I say that in all earnest of like, it's amazing. Certainly what you've accomplished at this part of your career is awesome. I love that you're still a toddler learning. That's a positive thing. I know someone's like, that guy just called him
Yeah.
a toddler, but that
No, I
you're
like.
continually learning, right?
Yeah.
And being in the blocks of the 400 means you still got 400 meters. There's a whole race in front of you, right? I mean, 10 years, 20, 30, 40. With the way medicine's going today, there's no risk in saying maybe it's a 50-year college coaching career, right? And I'm
Right.
just so excited to be able to see it here at chapter 1, at the intro of chapter 1. And what does chapter 2, 3, 4, 5 look like for you? It's, you're gaining a lot of experience, and you've got amazing, you
Yeah.
stand on the shoulders of some amazing people from Varga in high school, Boogie, Ed, and I know Brock. I know there's other people that have poured into you. You stand on
Yeah.
their shoulders, and it's cool to see you building what you're building. And what I'm most interested in seeing as we watch your career continue to progress here is, okay, well, who begins to start standing on your shoulders? What are the future
Yeah.
coaches that are going to come through your program as GAs, assistants, as athletes that go on and be like, hey, man, you know what Ben did for me? Man, it was his 10th year. He knew it all at this point. He won many, many titles, but he allowed me to do X, and he trusted me with this. And that's how
Yeah.
I became successful over here. That is true legacy. You're the type of person that is part of Boogie's legacy. Most people are going to think of Boogie's legacy as the athletes he coaches, and certainly that is a part. But the
Yeah.
athletes he develops, because you're going to go on and affect positively hundreds, thousands of athletes. Boogie that gets credit for that. He gets a little siphon of like, oh,
Yeah.
that's my tree, that's my network.
Yeah.
If I didn't
Definitely.
pour into Ben, I could have easily just dogged Ben and be like, hey, Ben, I coach pros. You don't need to be here. And Ben goes on and
Right.
becomes a great accountant. I don't know. That's awesome. But luckily, he saw something in you, believed in you, and allowed you guys to have a great relationship that moves into a great coaching career, man. It's
Yeah.
fascinating. I sit in a very humbling seat to be able to see guys like you and what the next 5, 10 years is going to look like. And I got everything before that on wax right here on the podcast. It's really awesome, man. It's really awesome. It's exciting to watch.
Yeah, yeah. No, Mike, I appreciate you having me in. And obviously I think what you do is great, because I think everyone's story is a little different, and there's something special in everyone's story. So for you to think of me and think highly enough to bring me on, I'm thankful that that you put me in there and gave me a chance to talk a little bit about what it's looked like early.
Yeah, well, you deserve it, my friend. I'm so grateful, and again,
Thank
so thankful for your time. I know it's busy. You don't even know what you're supposed to be doing today, but you just know you're supposed to be doing
You're
something
so right.
today.
You're so right, Mike.
And you carved out time for me, so we're just so grateful. I do have one more question. I almost forgot. I did write this down. I noticed your
Yeah.
bracelet. It says "Be like Grace." Can you
Yes.
tell me a little bit about that?
Yeah. So actually, I'm glad you asked. So Grace Shell was her name. She was a good family friend of mine from Central Illinois, actually. It would have been my first year at Indiana. So I think late 2020. Grace was a 16-year-old girl who passed away in a or in an ATV accident. Sorry.
Mm,
But she's very much one of those people who, like, when she steps in the room, Grace is there. And like we say it, like we say that, and do we really mean it? But like Grace was one of those infectious energies who just happiness and like radiating off her everywhere she went. So she passed away in this ATV accident, and then they started this movement like Be Like Grace, like treat people with kindness, live every day, um, all the way and stuff like that. So it's something I wear just to kind of remind me, like it can all be taken away in a second and it can end that quick. But while you're here and while you have the chance, just straight gas pedal, live it to the fullest. Don't don't carry like heavy things, treat people with kindness and just be a good person. Be kind to the people you interact with and do with what you can, because it can all go away that quick.
I love that. Thanks for sharing that. Grace is one of my favorite words. We need to give others more grace, and
Yes,
as
very much
importantly,
so.
we need to give ourselves more grace. So I love that,
Yeah.
and obviously, Grace's legacy lives on through trinkets like that, but it's really her memory,
Yeah.
and then how you conduct yourself with other people. That's how Grace's legacy continues to be positively affected,
Yeah.
even though she's unfortunately not with us. So thank you for sharing that. I saw that, and I thought there might be something special there. So I
Yeah.
appreciate that.
Yeah,
And I
definitely.
and I appreciate you being here again at the Gill Athletics Connections podcast. Um, again, I don't take this lightly. It's amazing, what we're putting together here. We're building a library of coaches from around the world, from first year head coaches and their second year overall of full-time coaching to, Boogie's brother Chris, who's now the head coach of University of Arkansas women, and everything in between. We've got some amazing the USTF CCCA high school boys and girls coaches of the year coming up here soon. These are people that positively affect 14, 18 to 22-year-old kids, and 99% of them aren't going pro. They're not all going to join Boogie's group here, okay?
Right.
But they're all
Right.
going to go become moms and dads, business owners, YMCA workers, American Cancer Society workers. They're all going to go do something to affect the world positively. And it's because of your impact that they can be emboldened to do that even more and shine a light in the world like Grace did at such a young age as well. So join us next week. We're going to do it all over again, have a lot of fun, and learn a new journey. Thanks for being here. Have a good day, everybody.